Visit forkpitch.com for curated content in a culinary marketplace.
Today on our Fork Pitch Media Series, we are talking with Dr. Jim Painter. Jim is Professor Emeritus at Eastern Illinois University and currently Adjunct Professor at the University of Texas School of Public Health. His current research specialties include heart disease and mindful eating. Jim is an advisor for the Sun-Maid Raisin Growers and consults with the National Dairy Council. He has served on the American Heart Association's Healthy Diet Business Committee and is a nutrition advisor for SugarWise. Jim worked for the Marriott Corporation in the 1980s, taught at the University of Illinois during the 1990s, and Eastern Illinois up until 2013. Jim has over 100 peer-reviewed publications, and to his credit has written a book called, publications to his credit, and has written a book called Let's Eat Mindfully. Welcome, Jim.
Thanks for having me, Jay. It's been a while since we worked together.
Exactly. So I'm looking forward to our talk today.
Yeah.
Today's segment is called the Cholesterol Conundrum. Science is a process, ideally an open system. It takes information and compares it to established theories or models. Good ones are reaffirmed. Weaker, incomplete ones are challenged by new data or results. However, sometimes science can become quote unquote established without being all that strong or accurate. And because other non-scientific factors can remain unchallenged for far too long. The role of cholesterol and dietary fat in human health went unchallenged for a long time, even though it turned out to be egregiously wrong. Jim, when you were working towards your PhD, what was the general consensus about cholesterol and health?
You know, what's amazing to me is that during the time in the 70s and into the 80s, when I was working on this, everybody seemed to agree. And I just did what my professors told me. And I taught that for a decade. Mm-hmm. And so let me share a couple of things.
Sounds really close to just following orders, but okay. Yeah.
It really is. And so this is 1977 dietary goals. This is where it all started. This is the first thing that came out in the late 70s. And what we have here is the dietary goals to reduce cholesterol. It came along with all the rest of it. Increase carbohydrates, reduce fat, reduce saturated fat, reduce cholesterol. That's 1977. And then the dietary guidelines took off after that 1980, and it says avoid too much fat, saturated fat, cholesterol, choose foods wisely. Up until 2010, the guideline was there. It had been there forever to reduce dietary cholesterol until we started looking at the data. It started here back with Ancel Keys, the savior of the world, back in the 1960s, and then lo and behold, eat butter in 2014, scientists labeled the enemy, why we were wrong. And so that gives you a basic idea. Ancel Keys came up with information. It just wasn't right based on a seven country study. And then it became established, and it was just like chiseling through concrete to get it to disappear.
So it became a consensus is what I'm hearing. Was it just the scientists doing this, or how did that happen?
It really wasn't the scientist. It was everyone. And so we looked at a little bit of data. I asked one of my students once, I want you to find out where this cholesterol thing came from. She came back after 3 months, Dr. Painter, I can't find anything. Nothing. You're kidding me. 300 milligrams of cholesterol, we put that around the world.
You sound like you were a lot of fun to have as a teacher, but go ahead. Yeah.
And so she gave me this study. She said, Doc, all I can find is this study. So we came up with this idea based on animal studies. Studies didn't take into account much, and they used huge amounts of cholesterol. She said she found this study from 1912. I said, are you joking? This rabbit study, she said, that's all that's there. I said, it's 100 years old. And so I was talking to her, and I said, well, here we picked a rabbit. Why did they pick a rabbit? Well, because rabbits are so close to us. And then I thought about it, and I thought, rabbits eat their own poo. This is a rabbit's stomach. And so rabbits eat their own poo. It helps them digest things. And I thought, geez, we don't do that usually. I say usually because I walked in my house the other day, and my little 1-year-old was picking up a little dog poop and was shoving it in his mouth and eating it. So generally we don't. So we had this study back from 1912, and it's held on for 100 years. There have been a lot of studies on dogs and pigs and other things, and you gave them cholesterol and their cholesterol didn't go up. But it stuck, and I keep seeing this thing. So it was bad information from the beginning, and it was 1,000 milligrams, 20,000 milligrams. They gave these animals huge amounts of cholesterol, more than we could ever eat. And lo and behold, this poor little rabbit who has never eaten cholesterol for the past 100,000 years, they gave it cholesterol and went, oh my goodness, it developed atherosclerosis. Well, of course, its body doesn't know how to handle eating cholesterol because it doesn't eat any. There's no carnivorous rabbits out there that are eating buffalo.
Have you ever seen Monty Python and the Holy Grail? There is at least one.
Yes.
So what are the effects of some of these policies?
You know, when we have something wrong in science, and this one was so wrong because it's based on anecdotal data, on data like this, that's with animals that don't fit, and it's huge amounts that we never could eat. All those things pile up, and we vilified fat, saturated fat, and cholesterol. I used to teach classes on how do you get rid of cholesterol, and I had liver, kidney, meat. Here's all this cholesterol. Those they kill you. Those are dangerous. And so I'd spend whole talks talking about how to get rid of cholesterol. And when we did that, the dietary guidelines came out in 1980 that said eat more carbs, and everyone went, yes, more carbs. And so we started eating it. And what did we end up with? We ended up with the Snackwell phenomenon. Now, I asked you, Jay, have you ever eaten these? Have you ever seen these Snackwell's cookies?
Oh, well, because I am in the food business. Yeah, they were all over everywhere for a very brief period of time until people, started consuming them. Yeah.
And so I was so deceived as a young scientist that these are made out of what, Jay? What's Snackwell? There's no fat in it, so what's it made out of?
It's got to be sugars.
Sugar. And so it is white refined flour and sugar. Now, I knew those things were bad back in the 70s and 80s, but I was so deceived. I fed them to my children because they're fat-free. And if they're fat-free, they must be good for me. I had a lady I knew, and she was probably, 250, 300 pounds, and she was eating an angel food cake, and she had about half of it consumed. And I said, what are you doing? She said, oh, it's fat-free. I can eat what I want.
Right.
Yikes. Well, I did the same thing. I thought fat's so bad. I know this stuff's bad, but it's not as bad. So we were so deceived thinking fat's bad, cholesterol's bad, saturated fat's bad. We just focused on the wrong thing. And whenever we do that, if we don't keep the main thing, then we end up getting sick or dying because we're looking at the wrong thing. I think you and I have talked about this maybe over a meal or two over the past decades. So that's what we did, is we created this mindset that fat, cholesterol are bad. And then the opposite was this. We had the food guide pyramid that had all these grains on the bottom that we said you should eat some whole grain, but nobody did. And they just ate all this white flour, full of carbs, no fiber, and it started this whole phenomenon.
So as a guy who's been wrong like twice or three times, I can understand people getting something wrong, but why did it stick for so long? Why? And as a scientist, can you explain it, or is it more sociological?
Well, one reason it's stuck is that we look at observational data, and this is associated with this. And Harvard has these huge studies that look at the association of fat with heart disease. Look at the association of the dietary cholesterol with heart disease. And we got sucked into this observational studies, not clinical trials, where we just feed somebody this and then feed them this and everything else stays the same, and then we see if whatever we fed them causes the problem. But we didn't have that. We just had all of this associational data. And we went so far with the associational data that we came up with the wrong answer. Association does not mean causation. But in addition to that, I found this study in 2016. And I remember reading this paper it talks about. I was reading the paper back in the early 80s, and it said, when you look at sugar, sugar looks like it's associated with heart disease. It looks like it's associated with obesity. It looks like it's associated with diabetes. It looks like it's associated with this. But, this study had the wrong data, and this study had the wrong methods for analysis, and this study, so we really don't know. And I thought, that's odd. They just said that sugar looks like it caused all these things. But then they tore down the data, and I thought, that's really strange. I mean, it looks like sugar's doing it. And then they said, well, their conclusion was, it really was, we don't know, it really was fat. And so the industry sponsored this research in the 60s and 70s that successfully doubt on hazards of sucrose, and it cast the doubt on that, and then it promoted fat is the dietary culprit. So we had these big studies that were observational. There were associations. Just because it's associated does not mean that this caused this at all. And we ran with that for decades. But in addition to that, there was this disingenuous stuff with Harvard and the sugar industry where I looked at some emails. The sugar industry said, oh my goodness, this data looks bad. And the scientists at Harvard wrote back and said, don't worry about it. I think we can fix this. And I thought, are you joking? And so part of it, Jay, is we were looking at associations, it's not causation. And part of it was people were just being disingenuous to lying about it.
So the agriculture lobby and the sugar lobby beat the dairy and the meat lobby is really what it came down to. If I'm in the meat business, I fire my lobbyists and go get the guys who are working for the sugar business. Is that kind of what it comes down to?
You know, I think so. And the reason is because it's so obvious. I mean, you look at the arteries that are clogged, they're full of fat and cholesterol. Logical inference is it must be fat and cholesterol that cause them. So they had this powerful, visual to say
it's availability bias, right?
Yeah, it really is. And so it is availability bias because this is what we have. And this looks like this should be causing it. But what's so funny is when you eat cholesterol, what people don't know is your body makes more cholesterol than you eat almost every time, unless you eat a ton of it. Your body, you take 300 milligrams, 500 milligrams, your body makes 4 or 5 times that. And so if you eat too much, your body makes less. And so what intuitively, it seems like if I eat more cholesterol, my cholesterol goes up, but your body adjusts to it. It really doesn't.
So when did we, or as a society, or as a field of science, start getting it right? And what changed it? Who stood on a chair and said, wait a minute?
You know what's funny with me is that I kept sending my students out doing studies between like a low carb diet and low fat diet, and a low carb diet that's low cholesterol and a regular diet. And they kept coming back with me with the wrong answer. I knew the low fat, low cholesterol diet was the answer. I mean, I just knew it. I learned it in the 70s and 80s, and that's what the answer was. And so after a while, the preponderance of the data overwhelmed me, and I had to switch. There's still a couple of groups that have not switched. I mean, the overwhelming groups have, but there's still some out there fussing and fighting that cholesterol in the diet is terrible. But it was the data that overwhelmed me. And so you and I have worked with eggs in the past, and the different people in the egg industry came to me, and when I started teaching this, that cholesterol is not the answer, then they started saying, wait, we want to help support you to get out. Fine. So I've worked for the egg industry, not because I did what they told me. They heard what I said, and they actually hired me to do it. So I think of this now, and I think of how stupid it was. Okay, you take an egg, you take a mom, and for 9 months, this baby is sucking all of the nutrients out of her body. People say they lose teeth, their bone mass goes down, whatever. So this baby is taking lots of energy to survive. Look at this egg. You lay an egg, nothing in, nothing out for 21 days. And that egg becomes an entire being. Now, you got to think there's probably a lot of nutrients in there. And where are they? In the yolk, because that becomes the being. What did I do? Cholesterol is so bad. I crack the egg. I throw the yolk down the drain by the hundreds, maybe the thousands over the years. Eat the white. It's the good protein anyway. Yeah, but all the nutrients are in the yolk.
Right.
We've done that so many times in life that cholesterol, we look at something and say, that part of it's bad. We're throwing the whole thing out. And we throw it out. So I started seeing studies like this with eggs. And so this is just a bunch of studies. Here's children, women, men, from a month to 3 months long. They were giving them, an egg is about half that. So this is like 2 eggs worth of cholesterol, 1 egg worth of cholesterol. And they gave them, and what happened is LDL went up in 1, 2, 3 of them. That's the bad cholesterol. And then in 4 of them, LDL didn't change at all. Oh, okay, well, that's not what people told me. And HDL is the good cholesterol. So you gave people eggs, and almost every time the good cholesterol went up. And I thought, well, bummer. And then the big thing is the ratio between LDL, we call it the bad cholesterol, and HDL, the good cholesterol. So you want the ratio to be in a good balance.
Right.
So generally, there was no change, or the balance went down in favor of HDL. So I'm thinking, oh my goodness, not only did we have this wrong, but we almost had it backwards. And in these where LDL went up, particle size makes a difference. So you've got these little tiny LDLs, and they can't get caught by the receptor, and they float around. But if you have the large fluffy LDLs, they get caught and they get pulled out of the system. So you want large size LDLs. And so what does egg do? Egg increases, whenever it does increase LDL, it increases the large LDL, which is the good stuff. What increases the small LDL? Highly refined sugars and carbohydrates.
So it's making the LDL go up, and it's making it harder to find and get rid of.
Yeah.
Essentially. Well, you've answered most of this question, but anything else you want to say about the role of cholesterol in our diet and how it's the consensus has changed?
Well, the consensus has changed. There's still, like I said, some people hanging on to these old ideas.
Is that who it is?
Huh?
Is it the ADA who still recommends a lower cholesterol?
I don't want to disparage anybody.
Oh, okay, fine. All right.
I'm just kidding.
I'm a citizen. I can, I'm a member of the public. I can say these things. Yeah.
That's right. And so who still has reduced dietary cholesterol in their guidelines? The National Lipid Association and the American Dietetic Association, which is now the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. And so they still have it in there. And I'm telling you, just about everywhere around the world, it has just fallen off of the guidelines. And the dietary guidelines of 2015, I love this. This is how great and how weird our government is. This is not the guidelines. What I'm showing you here is the scientific report. So this is the scientific report that was given to the Dietary Guidelines Committee in 2015. And what they said, 2015, dietary guidelines will not bring forward the recommendation of 300 milligrams a day because available evidence shows no appreciable association between consumption of dietary cholesterol and serum cholesterol. All right, so the scientists said we're not bringing it forward, and yes, and then it gets to our government, Jay.
Yes.
And what did the little bureaucrat there sitting in the office write down? Well, he wrote this, or she wrote it, whoever it is. The key recommendation from 2010 to limit consumption of dietary cholesterol to 300 milligrams is not included in this edition. Yes, they got it.
Right.
but then somebody put some pressure on them to make this next statement, which is, but this change does not suggest that dietary cholesterol is no longer important to consider. Yes, it does. It's exactly what they said. They said, we're not going to bring it forward because there's no association with what you eat and blood lipid levels. And so I don't know. Here's my sinister thought.
Okay, please. I love this. I love conspiracies. Please. Yeah.
Somebody that was very interested in keeping the cholesterol thing alive, keeping high cholesterol alive, keeping that. Now, who might do that? There is a drug industry where statins lower cholesterol.
Right.
And it could be one of, if not the most profitable drug out there. And for those people, if cholesterol goes away, then all of a sudden they're in trouble because they've lost all of their profits. Could it be that this little person was influenced by them to add this stupid thing? And now here's the idea. You can do two things. You can say, we're not going to bring it forward. It's not important. You can say, it is important. We're going to bring it forward. But you really can't say, it isn't important. We're not going to bring it forward, but it is important. I mean,
the sky is blue, but it's also might not be blue. Right.
It's like only in government can you get that kind of logic to come through. And there's even more pressure now. They can't go against bringing this 300 milligrams forward, but there's so much pressure right now on the 2020 Dietary Guidelines Committee to do something about this, to get it back in there because it fell out. And so we'll see what happens with all of this. But there's three opinions right now. The Heart Association dropped it in 2014. It's not in the Heart Association's guidelines.
Okay.
The USDA dropped it, but it's still getting pressure to be put back in. And the most recent meta-analysis showed that there isn't any association between dietary cholesterol and blood cholesterol. So where we look for truth is Walmart. So I sent a student to Walmart and I said, ask the people at Walmart, is dietary cholesterol associated with heart disease? And 87% of them said yes. And so in the minds of Walmart shoppers, where all truth comes from. But then I asked my students, and they're smarter because they've been listening to me, and they realize, okay, 80% still wrong, but less so. And then here are the professors.
At Jim, but go ahead. I'm sorry.
Here are the professors
Oh,
who are
God.
not keeping up with the data.
Uh-huh.
So in conclusion here, be very, very careful when someone has PhD behind their name and has not kept up on the data, because it just means piled higher and deeper of whatever thing they've been studying. So yeah.
That's disturbing but amusing stuff you have there. So I guess to wrap it up, as someone who has to communicate science to the non-scientific, although it looks to some extent like you're having some trouble doing to the scientific as well, but as someone who has to communicate to the non-scientific, we talked a little bit about availability bias, and there's also confirmation bias. How do you approach your targeted audience and get them to think about what they think is common sense, and how do you get them to change their mind?
I tell my students, and I've taught this for decades, is to be critical thinkers, to actually think. When someone tells you something, think about it, and then ask them a question about it to see what's really going on here. Because I give this example to my students. I go to a dietetic association meeting, and I'll say, oh my goodness, I walked in here and I think I need a new pair of shoes, but I already have one pair. It's black, it goes with everything. But don't I need more pairs of shoes? And then I realized, wait a minute, this place is full of women. It's the correlation with femaleness in this meeting is almost a perfect correlation. The relative risk of being female in that meeting is like 100%. I said, this meeting must cause people to be females, and my shoes are black, I need more shoes, because this meeting's turning me into a girl. And then they go, wait a minute. Yeah. That association between females and nutrition, it isn't females, it's nutrition dietitians that happen to be females.
Right.
And so I said, more than that, I said, every state I go to, every country I go to, it's the same thing. This association must mean either the meeting causes you to be females or females cause the meeting. But neither one of those is true. Nutrition causes the meeting, and they happen to be. And so when I tell people, and you see something in the news, and they say, look at this association. If the word association is there, realize it's not causation. Meat is associated with heart disease. Okay, but does it cause it? Eggs are associated with heart because it's still out there. Be very careful about association, because people do have confirmation bias, and when they see an association, if it backs up their preconceived ideas, then the confirmation bias goes, that's it.
Great. I look forward to having more conversations along these lines. It was a terrific little dialogue here, and I always enjoy talking to you, just because not only are you an expert in this field, but you approach it with a sense of wonder and joy. So Jim, thank you very much, and we'll be talking soon.
All right, thanks, Jay.
Visit forkpitch.com for curated content in a culinary marketplace.